Hey guys, Adam from Offshore's Photo again. Those of you who follow this channel probably know that I generally focus on surf photography. However, we are now in the summer months and summer is notoriously bad for surfing. You just don't tend to get many swells, many good waves in the summer. It tends to go flat in the UK. So I'm experiencing that at the moment in Devon. So the summer months is really a time to try and sort of look into other styles of photography. So in that vein, I decided to plan and go on a landscape photography trip. I've never really done much landscape photography. I've done like handheld shots, or living in rural areas. I would sort of walk around with the camera and occasionally take handheld landscape shots, or attempt to, but I've never really had much success with it and never given landscape photography a proper try. But I'm a pretty big fan of a few landscape photographers who sort of share their experience of landscape photography. I'm thinking of like Thomas Heaton, Adam Gibbs, and they sort of inspired me to think, well, why don't I just get in the car, explore a little bit and go on a proper landscape photography trip. So I've just got back after a week in Scotland with a brief stop off in the Lake District, and I thought I would share some of the images that I've taken with you. The itinerary for my trip was I left Devon and I headed up to Glasgow initially, and spent a couple of nights staying in Glasgow and explored Loch Lomond. I took a few shots in and around the area of Luss, which is a little village on the west coast of Loch Lomond, sort of about half the way up the loch. So the first image I'll show isn't really what you would classify typically as a landscape shot. It's just a sort of low contrast image of a ferry that I saw on the loch when the light was quite nice. And I do like this kind of sort of still minimalist sort of image, so I'll throw that one in, although it's not a classic landscape photography shot. And then I made a first attempt at some long exposure photography using a neutral density filter. I tried to take some long exposure shots of some features close to the lakeside. I'm not crazy about this image, but it's it was like a first attempt. I wouldn't say it's my very first attempt. I've attempted sort of long exposure photography in the past, but it was my first attempt using a neutral density filter with a longer exposure, sort of, I think it was around a 15 to 20 second exposure time on this image. So there's a couple of images that I took in the Loch Lomond region. I then got back in the car and drove another 4 hours up the road to the Isle of Skye. It's a beautiful place. I'm going to put up sort of 3 or 4 images that I took from the Isle of Skye. A couple of the images are taken from the coast, looking out to, looking away from the island onto the water. And then I did take some photos of the Old Man of Storr looking back from sort of with my back to the coastline, just because I think these images work a little bit because they at least give you a sense of the scale and the grandeur of the place. But the other images that I think the other image I was going to put up from my trip around Skye was literally just I was driving around, and you're constantly seeing these sort of spectacular sights on the Isle of Skye. So I'm just going to throw in an image that wasn't taken of a particular location. I couldn't tell you where I took it, but I just liked the composition, the movement of different lines through the composition. And the great thing about shooting with the Nikon Z7, which is a really high resolution camera, is the high resolution gives you a feeling of the texture of the land. So I like that comes across in some of the photos I took on this trip. I did make an attempt at some shots of a little waterfall that I came across. I was driving along I think it was on my drive up towards the Old Manor store, and I just saw this little waterfall, and I got out. I took probably 12 different compositions. Most of them failed. This one, I think there are some things about it that I like. It's quite heavily processed, this image, so you know, to some extent I've done quite a bit of work in the edit, and that won't be to everyone's taste. So those are the images from the Isle of Skye. Next, I drove back down from the Isle of Skye through Glen, and I went about half an hour south of Glen and stopped at this place called Glen Etive. I took shots of the peaks with clouds, and a style of landscape photography that I really like is this sort of minimalist style, and Thomas Heaton, whose videos I watch quite a lot, he is really quite into minimalist photography, although he doesn't do it exclusively, and he's always a little bit almost apologetic about his more minimalist images. But I personally really like those minimalist images that are sort of like a little vignette that take just one element of the landscape and almost take it out of context and just present it. And people who are able to do that and get the composition really right and sort of get a sense of a story and atmosphere in the image, I really like that. But I'm not saying I've achieved that with these images, but I like them. That's all I would say. There are a couple of images there that I like, that are pleasing to me. Sometimes it's difficult to work out whether you know, photography can be very personal, and I'm often surprised if I'm showing someone some photographs I've taken, I'll be flicking through, and people will often like an image that I could sort of take it or leave it, I'm not crazy about, and then other images that I absolutely love, people just aren't interested in. So it's interesting. But anyway, those images I like, and when I got out at Glen Etive, I did sort of wander around, and I came across another waterfall and sort of clambered down some rocks and had another go at a long exposure shot of a waterfall, which is kind of a staple of landscape photography. There's nothing particularly original about these compositions. You know, they're 10 a penny if you like, but that was part of what I wanted to do on this trip. I wanted to just see, can I go out and technically take a landscape photography shot, and can I produce an image that sort of that at least doesn't have enormous glaring problems with it. And I don't think that these images do. I'd be interested in any feedback people have, if people are really into landscape photography and they want to give me pointers, or they want to share feedback, whether it's positive or negative about the images, I can take it. If I'm honest, in the past when I've tried landscape photography, at times I've felt a little bored. But on this trip, as the days went on, I got more and more excited by that process of, you come across a potential location and then you sort of wander around looking for a composition, and then you focus in on some little element, and I started to experience some of that sort of excitement that I've seen other landscape photographers talk about. I stayed the night in Glasgow. The next day, my plan was I was going to go and see family in the Midlands, but on the way down, I was going to stop off in the Lake District. I wasn't sure where, but in the end, I chose Ullswater. I didn't find any obvious great classic compositions of the lake itself, so I went exploring. I drove away from the lake a little way, and then I came across this other smaller body of water that had some reeds and a lot of greenery around it, and I just came across this composition, which was essentially foliage and reflections, and there's this gate, and I really like this photograph, and it's one where I don't know if it works because I wonder if it's slightly confusing or if it's almost verging on abstract because of the nature of the reflections at the top third of the image, but I really like it. I mean, the Nikon, the Z7, the resolution is so fantastic as always that I really get a feeling of the texture of everything. I feel as though I can touch the gate and I can feel all of the foliage, and yeah, I was quite happy with this image. This was just a handheld shot, but again, I'd be interested in feedback as to whether or not the composition is confusing to look at. As I was sort of leaving Ullswater, I came across this National Trust site called IRA Force, which is a waterfall. There's a lot of potential there for landscape photography. This was, again, I was quite tired at this point and I rushed a little bit. There is a larger, there's a main sort of central point where you can look at two of the larger waterfalls that are there. Well, it's a single waterfall sort of split into two sections, which I took an image of. Although access to that is somewhat restricted at the moment, I think related to COVID. But then there's also another area where you can walk sort of further upstream, and I think there would be enormous potential for landscape photography there. Anyway, I just wanted to share some of the images I got on this trip. Obviously, the channel is still mostly going to be focused on surf photography, so people who are following me because they're interested in surfing and surf photography, I'm definitely going to be continuing to do a lot of surf photography and videos about that. But yeah, I just wanted to share my sort of first experience of a landscape photography trip and put some of the results out there and get some feedback. So any feedback's gratefully appreciated. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. I'm going to be trying to keep the content coming, so there should be new stuff for you fairly soon.